Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a video you've probably seen circulating and going around the booktube community. You have probably heard of it. A really big booktuber, her name is Steph Bohrer, and this is called the book recommendations tag. She just recently created this, and as a new booktuber, I found it to be so exciting that she did this because not only can you do tags if you're a big booktuber. Starting out my booktube journey, I've noticed that a lot of new booktubers will tend to circulate like tags and stuff, which I find to be so fun because it kind of really breaks down and introduces the types of books you read, like more about yourself, about how you got into reading or the types of books you recommend. And that's why I felt like her booktube tag was really cool because it's literally based on book recommendations and just books based off of your reading like past. So I just feel like that was really fun, and I feel like it's a new way for us to also get to introduce the books that we personally recommend to not only just like on YouTube but also to our friends, our families, and just anybody who knows that you read. So I feel like this is really cool and fun and exciting to see different variations of what people pick and what they decide to choose. I don't know why I'm so out of breath. I think it's because I eat so much chips. So I'm excited to go into this and share my books, and I'm hoping one day I can look back at this tag and see how different my books will be if I were to do the tag again, like later on in life somewhere. So without further ado, let's get started into the book recommendations tag. I'm going to be reading the questions on my phone, and then I'll kind of go into the books I personally recommend. So the question number 1 says, a book you tell people is your favorite. So as she stated, it's like a book if someone went up to you and was like, what's your favorite book? I've noticed if I tell people I do read, they're like, oh, what is your favorite book? And the first book that pops up into mind, it's in such an old book, but it's actually something that I feel like kind of got me into reading because I remember trying to read like free samples of it because I was in high school and I wasn't, you don't really have as much money back then. You don't have money to just go out and go buy something or the means to go out and get something. And I just remember reading in high school, and it's Perks of Being a Wallflower. And for the longest time, if people asked me throughout college, throughout high school, college, and after, that was always the one book I always said, oh, it's Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen. I feel like that was one of the books that kind of gravitated me towards just the types of read I really like, and it really got me into it because I can tell I was really desperate to read that book because I would read little samples of it on the internet, like find free little samples to read because I wasn't able to get the actual book until I finally was able to. And yeah, and then when the movie came out, I was really, I love that movie. So that's like one of the older books I would recommend. But one of them, I feel like this goes on like one of my top shelves, and I don't want to go too in depth about it because I want to talk about it in another video. But this is like a really recent read that I feel like I want to tell people is my favorite, and it's If We Were Villains by Emma Rio. I just feel like it was just such a, it was an art piece of a book. To me, I loved it so much that I feel like if someone were to ask me what book to read, that's the book I would say, oh, that's like one of my favorite books. It's something where I wouldn't be like ashamed or something I wouldn't feel weird telling people. I feel like that was a book that I really want to just kind of like show off and tell them like, yeah, this is like one of my favorite books. So that was one of them. Question number 2 says, a book that is your guilty pleasure. So mine is a series, and there's like a lot of mixed reviews about these books. So the books I would say are the Touch of Darkness series, and it's by Scarlett St. Clair. And my favorite ones I would have to say would be the first and the second ones. I'm gonna be honest, these weren't like some amazing like top tier writing. I wasn't super supportive of some of the things that happened in this book, but I kept reading the next one and the next one. I'm already caught up until her other one releases, which I'm going to read. It's almost like those books that you have that you are proud of, that you've read and you really like. It's like one of your guilty pleasures, but you don't really want to just boast about it because, well, first off, there's just like mixed things. So like there is trigger warnings in these books, so just a heads up. And there is just some parts of it where when I was reading the reviews afterwards, and one of them was just saying how Persephone is as a character, and then you start to find it kind of annoying, like how she is. And then also just like some of the parts in here were just so repetitive where I had to like skip through it. But overall, in general, these books just kept me gravitated. They were my guilty pleasures. I kind of just kept reaching out for them and reading them, and I probably would read them again one day. But yeah, these books got me kind of into like more fantasy, Greek mythology based books, and kind of opened my book genres a little bit better. Okay, question number 3 says, a book that everyone loved but you didn't. I have nothing against this because there's a reason why everybody loves these books, but I personally I couldn't connect with it. I don't know if maybe it was just the timing I read it was off. Maybe I can give it another try, and I have nothing against that. I feel like that's the thing about books. You can always, just because you don't like a book doesn't mean you're like downplaying what someone else thinks. It's, if anything, that they see something in it that you weren't able to see, which is more like how Steph said it. She said said that, or so she was saying that she felt like she was the odd one out because she couldn't connect with that. And that's exactly how, I feel like she put that into like perfect words, because that's exactly how I felt with these ones. Anyways, I'm just gonna go into it. One's a DNF book that I recently DNF'd, and then another one is a book I just talked about recently too. And the first one that I did finish and read all the way through, the first one, it's Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and I feel I wanted to like this book so much. I feel like it was something that sounded so intriguing and so beautiful and poetic, but for some reason I just couldn't connect to the characters, and I feel like the characters were one of the main parts of the story. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was during the time frame I read it. I don't know if I just wasn't really putting much effort into it, but I just couldn't connect with the characters. When I read one of the reviews, someone did say it felt kind of scripted, and that's exactly how I felt. I felt like I was just reading off of a script, like a manuscript, and I didn't really get like a full connection and feel for each person, and I feel like that's what makes up the whole story. So I feel like I want to give it another try, but I personally I feel like that book was getting hyped up, and I heard so many people talking great things about it, but I just couldn't get into it. And I don't know, I want to try it again because I want to see what everybody loves about it. I want to see what I was doing wrong, and I just want to see maybe there's something I need to do that a little bit different, like approach it a little bit different. But the next book, I wanted to connect with this book so bad, and I tried so hard. I don't really just DNF a book and ever feel so like upset over it, but I was upset. Okay, so this book is called 1,000 Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole, and I could not connect with the story. I read it until halfway through, which I feel like I kept trying to push myself to read it, and I have no hate or anything if you love this book. I'm not trying to shit talk your book or anything. I feel like this book, I can see why it's an emotional read, and I can see why people might like it. I just could not connect with it. I just felt like it wasn't as realistic. I felt like it was a little bit too, for me personally, when I read it, I was so excited because I watched so many videos of people just bawling their eyes out to it, feeling so sad and finding it to be such a great read, and I was excited. But then when I read it, I actually felt so irritated that I kept trying to read it, but I just could not get into it. I just felt like it wasn't as realistic to me personally, and I don't know, I just don't know if the way that they portrayed the characters in their positions, I don't know if I felt like it was as real as it could be. I felt like I couldn't connect with that part because it just felt false. Like it was just false emotion and just putting a mask on everything. That's how I felt. I'm not saying like it's a bad thing. I want to try reading it again one day. I had to put that book down because I was like, okay, you know what? I'm not gonna waste time trying to read it. I feel like I already kind of wasted it halfway. I kept trying so hard. I even try to watch other people reading it, and one thing about books is like if I watch vlogs, it kind of hypes me up a little bit better, but I just could not get hyped up for this book. I just couldn't get into it, and I did put that down. And I would question, why does everybody like this book so much? Like, what's wrong with me? Why didn't I like this book? So that's, to this day, I still think about that, and it's just I'm kind of a perfectionist, so not being able to finish that book gets to me all the time, especially when I see people just crying over it. It's like, what's wrong with me? Like, why couldn't I couldn't feel for the characters or nothing. But yeah, that was one of them. So I did one DNF and then one that I did fully read. So the next question is a book that you read the fastest. Book would definitely be Rock Paper Scissors by Alice Feeney. I've talked about this book again in one of my videos, so I'll just link it up above. But I think I read it within like 3 days, like 2 days actually, and I just remember I was just so sucked into the story because it's a thriller, and I was just on so many cliffhangers that I had to keep reading the next one and finding out what happened. And I felt like it was so easy to get into. It wasn't like too complex or too complicated, so I felt like I was so excited to just find out what happened, and I was so committed to this story and this plot, and I had to see what was gonna happen. So I just remember just speeding through it, and I was so shocked that I finished it that fast. I was just really shocked at how fast I went through that book. It was just so easy to get into, so I definitely recommend that. Question number 5, it says a book that deserves more hype. I feel like, so I've talked about this book, but I feel like Frost by C.N. Crawford, I feel like that was such a good read. It was so easy, it was humorous, it was funny and witty, and there was romance within it for sure. It's like a fantasy fae sealy world, and I just felt like the way that she described everything, like the setting, the plot, the characters and their history and what they're going through, I don't know, she just made it so funny. It was like a fantasy rom-com. I just felt like it was such a good book, and I didn't really see a lot of people talking about it. I remember looking on BookTube and trying to see how many people like spoke about it, and I only found maybe like 1 or 2 videos, but not that much, and I was so shocked because I feel like that was such a good book. It was just so easy to get into. Also, it's just a slow burn. Like, who doesn't love slow burns? I don't know, I feel like people should talk about it and read it, give it a try. Question number 6 says a book that is becoming a movie or TV show. So the book I chose was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, and I believe they just started talking about this becoming a TV show show. I'm not for sure how accurate this is, but I've heard so many people say that it is. But also, I just want to say that this edition I have was a birthday gift. It was so unexpected, and it's just a beautiful book. This is like actually one of my most favorite books. This was a beautiful book surprise on my birthday from one of my bestest friends. She's like the only friend that I know that religiously reads and I can talk to about books. And shout out to her for getting this beautiful, beautiful book, because I think it's so gorgeous. And knowing that it came from someone who loved the book and then they just gifted it to you, it's just one of the most, it's just such a beautiful, like, it's so beautiful and so sweet, because this is a book I want to hold on and cherish forever. So, and I love her so much. This was just so sweet. I was not expecting that. A book that you have reread the most, and I actually haven't reread a book that I can think of. I can give a couple recommendations of certain books I do want to reread. I for sure want to read the Harry Potter series. I want to reread Twilight. This was like one of my first most favorite books, and this is Stolen by Lucy Christopher. I read this a long time ago, and it's just pretty much, it's a letter to her kidnapper, and it sounds really weird, but I really like this book. It was just, I remember reading it and I felt it was just so interesting and intriguing, and also so artistic, if that makes sense. It was just so abstract and it was really fun. So this is another book I want to reread because I want to see how I feel about it again. Okay, the next question says, a book from a genre you don't typically read. Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney was one for sure, because that kind of got me into thrillers and kind of made me start gravitating towards more a different genre. And I'm not against opening up to different genres, because I feel like they're really cool to find. There's always a good book in every genre, I feel. But one is a memoir, and this is kind of what got me more into memoirs, and it's called And Now We Have Everything on Motherhood Before I Was Ready by Megan O'Connell. And okay, hear me out. If you're not a mom, you can still read this book, because it just reflects like so many different things, like just like unfair justice and how you feel as a human being in like different various situations where you can be compared to someone else, or when your body's undergoing different changes. And it just, for me personally, I really reflected on it really well because of the motherhood aspect and the postpartum aspect. Obviously there was not a lot that there's some parts of it I didn't relate to, but there was some little moment that she felt that I could understand, especially when it came to like my body changing during pregnancy and postpartum and adjusting to a new lifestyle, and how just the parenthood perception within society is viewed. I just feel like she wrote this in such a like funny, it was actually really humorous too. So I feel like this is what kind of got me into it, and to more memoirs that I'm not against reading. Would definitely recommend it, even if you're not a mom. But if you are a mom, I feel like this is a really good book to kind of read for fun. Number 8 says, a book that deserves all the hype it gets. Okay, for sure I would say Beach Read and The Invisible Life. Invisible Life was just so easy to get into because each chapter was really short and quick, and you just get a different time jump. So it was really cool, and you get so many different perspectives. You probably heard about this book a million times, but this was for sure something that I feel like was hyped up. I feel like it's just such an easy book to get into. It was just a really nice, but also at the same time kind of deep rom-com, where there's just a little bit of a heavy topic within it, but it's not too heavy where it's just brooding over the book. It was just, yeah, it was like a perfect balance. It was just a light read. It was like a perfect summer rom-com. So, okay, number 10 says, a book you usually recommend when asked to give a recommendation. And I feel like this is kind of hard because I feel like it just depends on the person asking and what they're into, especially if they're not big readers. The last thing I would ever want to do to someone is put them in a reading slump. So I feel like I would just recommend something that could be read even if you're not a big reader, if you don't have a particular like request when it comes to books, like if you're not really, you don't care if it's a fantasy or a romance. The two I chose, one of them is like, it's just an old book, but I feel like it was always something I just said, oh my gosh, have you ever read this? You should read this. It's The Zombie Survival Guide by Max Brooks. And this is just a fun read. It's just like random tips on how you would survive in a zombie apocalypse. I just feel like it's so fun and interesting, especially with all these new series and shows and movies coming out with like apocalyptic zombies and The Last of Us and everything coming out. I feel like this should be brought back out again because this is an OG book. I've had this book for years. Actually, fun fact, I kept this book in my car just in case if I ever needed a book to read. So that's just always a book I would recommend to anybody. It's not really anything heavy or deep. It's just random things like where to go if zombies were to attack the world, or what would you use? What's the best weapon of choice? And I thought, oh yeah, like of course you're gonna do that. But then when you read it, you think more critical about it and you're like, oh wow, I never thought about that. It's like reading a tactical book but in a humorous way. And of course, again, I'm gonna talk about this book a million times, but it's gonna be The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, because I feel like you get so many different time frames of one's life, and because of her situation, you also get just different chapters of different perspectives of the people she meets and what they're going through, the good and the bad, different types of lifestyles and conflicts, and you get different perspectives of every character. So I just feel like it was a really rounded out book, and each chapter was a new story. And I just feel like this was such a good book. I would recommend this to everybody. So the next question says, a book that has your favorite characters. Aside from Harry Potter, if I'm going to change it up a little bit, I would for sure say this one was kind of hard to think about because I feel like you have to think about all the good characters within the book and then the bad characters. But I feel like this book I mainly liked because of the characters, and it is Keeper of Enchanted Rooms by Charlie N. Holmberg. I love the characters within this book, and that's what made me like the book the most. I just feel like they were just really just witty and charming and whimsical, and just like the way they were to each other, I just felt like it was like a found family. So I would definitely recommend this book if you're looking for like a character type of setting. Okay, so number 12 says, a book you wish you could live in. I'm gonna throw it back to like elementary, middle school, and for sure say Harry Potter, because I would for sure live in that world in a heartbeat. I chose Sorcerer's Stone because that's just introducing the whole world in general. Also the Prisoner of Azkaban. I literally dream to this day about getting my letter and Hedwig just showing up at my door, or any type of owl just bringing a letter to me, and knowing that I'm not a muggle and I'm part wizard is just, that's just something I like dream of. So I'd for sure say Harry Potter. This is the world for sure I would live in. That's like not even a question. Every other Harry Potter fan would say the same exact thing, because how can you not? That's exactly the first thing that popped up in my head. Okay, so the next question is, a book you thought you would hate but you ended up loving. The book I thought I was gonna not really be into was Regretting You by Colleen Hoover. I felt like I just wasn't, it's not just about the cover, I wasn't really drawn to the cover or anything. I just felt like it was gonna be just something, I just felt like it was just not gonna be something I was gonna be really into. It just didn't really sound as appealing. I even read the synopsis and I wasn't crazy about it. That book was just so dramatic and heavy when it came to conflicts, and just really put in a perception of how heavy the situations were for each character. So I just feel like that was what pulled me in, and I ended up actually really liking it and feeling a little bit emotional towards it. Okay, number 14 is a book that made you cry. And I don't really cry in books, but the book that did make me cry, I didn't cry heavy, like ugly crying, but I did cry like a little bit where, you know, like dabbing, like the Kim Kardashian dab. It was Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. That one, it just made me feel really just emotional, because you just put your points of view in each character and think about how they're feeling and what they're going through, being put amongst a different situation where it's just a huge conflict and just wanting to connect with someone so bad. I felt like that book just made me feel so sad but so happy, just like on the movie Inside Out, where when they touch the core memories and there's like a little bit of happiness and sadness mixed inside, that's exactly how I felt, and it was just like a beautiful thing. It was like a beautiful cry. Number 15 says, a book you wish you could read for the first time. I don't know why it's embarrassing. I feel like we should just all embrace it more, because we've all been once invested into this story. But Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. Listen, I feel like when I read this book, I read it in, I think like freshman year in high school. And growing up, my parents were crazy strict. So the one thing that didn't make me feel like I was just always stuck inside the house and I didn't have like such a boring high school life was reading Twilight. Because these books, like, she just goes on this crazy adventure with vampire and all these things, going as a Voltaire and stuff, and this book really made me feel just some type of way when I was reading it. I just remember I felt so invested in the story, and I remember how it felt. It was like the butterflies and like the attachment to the characters. I was one of those crazy, not that crazy, but I was really invested into this book, and I remember being so drawn to it before, and sometimes I want that book, that feeling again when I read books, like that like butterfly type of feeling when you read those books as you did when you were younger. So I feel like this is something I'd want to read again for the first time. Okay, that is it for the book recommendations tag video. I had so much fun compiling all these books and thinking really critically about what I would choose and talk about, and it kind of made me rummage through my bookshelf for some of my older books that I've kind of talked about before here and there in like my life, but not have reached out to recently. It was really cool to just see what my book picks are, and I loved watching everybody else's book picks and seeing what they chose for their tags. So I feel like if you are willing to do this tag, you should definitely do it, because it was really fun. I had so much fun doing this video, and thanks to Steph Bohrer again for making this tag, and I'll see you guys soon on the next video. Bye!